My name's Daisy, and this is the story of how I learned that family isn't always blood, and sometimes the people who should love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. I came into this world as an unwelcome surprise to my parents, fresh out of college with stars in their eyes and careers on their minds. When my mom found out she was pregnant, she wanted an abortion. It wasn't the right time, they weren't ready, all that jazz. But my grandparents had other ideas. See, they were loaded, and they'd been bankrolling my parents' lives. When they caught wind of the pregnancy, they laid down the law: have the baby, or kiss the gravy train goodbye. From day one, I was an afterthought. My mom couldn't wait to get back to work, leaving me with a revolving door of nannies and my grandmothers. Don't get me wrong, I'm grateful for the care they gave me, but it wasn't the same as having real parents. As I grew older, my grandparents started to back off. They'd done their duty, keeping me alive and all, and now they were off to enjoy their golden years in exotic locales. Can't blame them, I guess. But it left me even more alone. By the time I was 7, I was practically raising myself. I knew how to cook basic meals, do my own laundry, and get myself ready for school. It wasn't ideal, but it was my normal. Then, everything changed. My mom got pregnant again. This time, it was different. My parents were ready, excited even. They'd climbed the corporate ladder, made names for themselves. Now they could afford to be parents, or so they thought. When my sister was born, it was like the sun had finally risen in our house. My parents were over the moon, cooing and fawning over her like she was made of gold. And I was pushed even further into the shadows. As the years went by, the difference in how we were treated became more and more obvious. My sister got the best of everything: toys, clothes, attention. If she wanted something, she got it. If she did something wrong, it was brushed off with a laugh and a kids will be kids. Me? I learned not to ask for things. I wore hand-me-downs and made do with what I had. If I screwed up, it was met with disappointment and lectures about responsibility. Don't get me wrong, we weren't poor. Far from it. My parents were doing well, really well. But in their eyes, I was already grown, already independent. Why waste money on me when my sister needed it more? I threw myself into my studies. If I couldn't have their love, I'd have their respect. I got top grades, joined every club I could, stayed out of trouble. But it was never enough. They'd nod absently when I showed them my report card, then turn back to my sister's finger-painting masterpiece. By the time high school rolled around, I was counting the days until I could leave. I applied to colleges in secret, not telling my parents until I'd already been accepted. When I finally got into one of the best colleges, I packed my bags and left without a word. It took them 3 days to notice I was gone. 3 whole days. And even then, it was only because my mom wanted some yogurt. When she called, her voice was casual, like she was asking about the weather. "Daisy, could you pick up some low-calorie yogurt from the health food store on your way home?" I almost laughed. Here I was, starting a new chapter of my life, and all she cared about was yogurt. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I'm not at home. I've been at college for 3 days now. I'm living in the dorms." There was a moment of silence on the other end. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, trying to process this information. Then, without a hint of remorse or concern, she said, "Oh. Well, if you come back, you'll have to stay at a hotel. We've given your room to your sister." Life at college was a breath of fresh air. But money was tight. My parents didn't offer any financial support. But my grandparents, bless their hearts, came through for me. They sent me small amounts regularly, just enough to keep me afloat. It wasn't much, but it meant everything to me. Not just the money, but the fact that someone in my family actually cared. "Daisy, dear," my grandmother would say during our infrequent phone calls, "we're so proud of you. You focus on your studies, all right? Don't worry about anything else." Those words were like a balm to my soul. I threw myself into my studies with renewed vigor, determined not to let them down. I couldn't work part-time like many of my classmates, the course load was too heavy, and I was determined to excel. So I pinched pennies, lived on ramen more often than not, and made every cent count. Meanwhile, life back home continued without me. My sister, the golden child, was struggling in school. Not that it mattered to my parents, they hired the best tutors money could buy, showered her with rewards for the slightest improvement, and made excuses for her every failure. By my senior year, companies were already lining up to recruit me. My professors sang my praises, my resume was impeccable, and I had my pick of job offers. But none of them felt quite right. I wanted more. I wanted to prove to myself, and maybe, just maybe, to my family, that I could make it on my own terms. So I took a leap of faith. I applied to a prestigious international company in Europe. It was a long shot, but I figured I had nothing to lose. When the acceptance email came, I nearly fell out of my chair. This was it. My ticket to a new life, a fresh start. I graduated with honors, my grandparents beaming proudly in the audience. My parents? They sent a generic congratulations card. My sister didn't even bother with that. But I didn't care. I was beyond seeking their approval. As I packed my bags for Europe, I thought about calling my parents to say goodbye. In the end, I decided against it. What was there to say? They'd made it clear where I stood in their lives. Instead, I hugged my grandparents tight, promising to call and write often. Life in Europe was everything I'd hoped for and more. Every now and then, I'd call my parents. Old habits die hard, I guess. But each conversation was like pulling teeth. They'd give monosyllabic answers, always too busy or too distracted to really talk. And they never, not once, called me. Then I met Marco. He was in the marketing department, all charm and quick wit, with a smile that could light up a room. We started as colleagues, became friends, and before I knew it, we were falling in love. When Marco proposed on a moonlit beach in Positano, I didn't hesitate. We decided to have the wedding in Italy. We should go tell your parents in person, Marco said one night as we pored over wedding plans. And invite them properly. It's the right thing to do. So we flew back to the States, armed with wedding invitations and hope. Foolish hope, as it turned out. From the moment we walked into my childhood home, it was clear we weren't welcome. My parents were cold, distracted. They barely looked at Marco, barely acknowledged our news. "Oh, that's nice," my mother said, her eyes on her phone. "We're terribly busy though. Your sister's new apartment needs work, and we're overseeing the renovations." We stayed for a week. A long, uncomfortable week. My parents were hardly ever home, always at my sister's new place. But my sister? She was always around, always watching, always there. I saw the way she looked at Marco. The flutter of her eyelashes, the coy smiles. It made my stomach churn. "Marco," she cooed one evening, "I'd love your opinion on the color scheme for my bedroom. Why don't you come up and take a look?" I saw the discomfort on Marco's face. "I don't think," he started, but I cut him off. "That's enough," I snapped at my sister. "He's my fiancé. Back off." Her face crumpled into a pout. "I was just being friendly," she whined. "God, Daisy, you're so selfish. You always want everything for yourself." She stormed off, no doubt to cry to our parents. And sure enough, not 10 minutes later, my mother was there, face like thunder. "How dare you speak to your sister that way," she hissed. "After all we've done for you." I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "All you've done for me? That's a joke, right? You've done nothing but ignore me my entire life." But it was useless. In their eyes, I was always going to be the villain. The unwanted child who dared to want more. That night, as Marco and I lay in bed in a nearby hotel, because of course, my old room was now a home gym for my sister, I made a decision. "Let's go home," I said softly. "Back to Italy. This isn't my home anymore. It hasn't been for a long time." Marco pulled me close, his warmth a comfort in the cold reality of my family's indifference. "Okay," he said simply. "Let's go home." As we boarded the plane the next day, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief to be leaving the toxicity behind, sadness for the family I never really had. Back in Italy, life slowly returned to normal. Marco and I threw ourselves into wedding planning, determined to create the perfect day. But the visit home had left a bitter taste in my mouth, a reminder of all I'd left behind. "Are you sure about this?" Marco asked one evening as we sat on our balcony, the sun setting over the Tuscan hills. "Not inviting your sister, I mean." I took a sip of wine, letting the rich flavor roll over my tongue before answering. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I said finally. "After what happened. I can't have her there, Marco. I won't." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. What I didn't tell him was about the messages. The explicit, inappropriate messages my sister had been sending him on social media since we'd left. I'd seen them by accident one day when using his phone. He'd been too embarrassed, too kind to tell me. But I knew. And it was the final straw. 6 months flew by in a whirlwind of cake tastings, venue visits, and dress fittings. Before I knew it, we were just weeks away from the big day. There was just one last thing to do. With a deep breath, I picked up the phone and dialed the number I still knew by heart, even after all these years. "Oh, Daisy, what is it?" "We're rather busy at the moment." My mother's voice, distracted as always. I swallowed hard, pushing down the hurt. "I'm calling about the wedding. I booked your flights and hotel. Everything's paid for. We'd love for you and Dad to come." There was a pause, then, "That's nice, dear. But what about your sister? We haven't received an invitation for her." I closed my eyes, steadying myself. "She's not invited, Mom. After what happened during our visit, and the messages she's been sending Marco. I don't want her there." "Messages? What messages?" My mother's voice had an edge to it now. "The explicit ones, Mom. The ones she's been sending my fiancé. It's inappropriate and disrespectful. I won't have that drama at my wedding." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could almost hear the gears turning in my mother's head, trying to find a way to excuse my sister's behavior, to make me the bad guy once again. "I don't know what you're talking about. Your sister would never do such a thing. Daisy, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. For once in my life, I'm putting myself first. You and Dad are welcome to come. The flight details will be emailed to you. I hope you'll be there." She didn't say anything and just hung up. The morning of my wedding day dawned bright and beautiful. Everything was perfect, the flowers, the music, the food. Everything except for the 2 empty seats in the front row. As the hours ticked by and guests began to arrive, a knot formed in my stomach. Where were they? Surely they couldn't do that to me. "Marco," I said, my voice trembling slightly. Can we delay the ceremony a bit? I need to make a call." His eyes filled with understanding and sympathy. "Of course, amore. Take all the time you need." With shaking hands, I dialed my mother's number. It rang, and rang, and rang. Just as I was about to give up, there was a click. "Hello?" My mother's voice, groggy and irritated. "Mom, where are you? The wedding's about to start." There was a pause, then, "Daisy? Do you have any idea what time it is here?" "We were sleeping. It's the middle of the night." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Sleeping? But the wedding. You were supposed to be here. I sent you the tickets, the hotel information, everything." "Oh, that." Her voice turned cold. "Well, we decided not to come. Your sister is having her housewarming party today. We couldn't miss that." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Her housewarming? But she's known about my wedding date for months. Why would she schedule it for today? Don't be selfish, Daisy. The world doesn't revolve around you. Besides, how could you expect us to go to one daughter's celebration and not the others? If you had invited your sister like you should have. Mom, I cut her off, my voice hard. You know why I didn't invite her? After what she did. That's all in your head, Daisy. Your sister would never do such a thing. You've always been jealous of her, always trying to make her look bad. I laughed, a bitter sound. Jealous? Is that what you think this is about? God, Mom, do you even hear yourself? Don't take that tone with me, young lady. This is your own fault. Your sister's party is none of my business, I finished for her. Just like my wedding is clearly none of yours. Goodbye, Mom. Enjoy the party. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking but my resolve firm. I looked at myself in the mirror, took a deep breath, and made a decision. And so, I walked down the aisle alone. No father to give me away, no mother to shed a tear. But as I looked at Marco, standing there with love shining in his eyes, I realized I didn't need them. I had everything I needed right here. Time has a way of healing wounds, or at least numbing them. Marco and I built a life together, full of love, laughter, and success. We'd both climbed the corporate ladder, our hard work paying off in promotions and accolades. We traveled, we made friends, we created a home. My parents never reached out. No congratulations on our wedding, no holiday greetings, nothing. And after a while, I stopped expecting them to. I stopped checking my phone on my birthday, stopped hoping for a Christmas card. It was easier that way. Then, on a random Tuesday in April, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number with a very familiar area code. My hometown. Hello? I answered, my heart pounding. Daisy, is that you? My mother's voice, sounding older, more tired than I remembered. Daisy, we need your help. And so the story came out. The company my parents had worked for, the one they'd sacrificed everything for, including their relationship with me, had gone bankrupt. They were out of work, with no savings to fall back on. We've always lived well, you know that, my mother said, a note of desperation in her voice. We know we haven't been good parents to you. But we need help, please. I closed my eyes, conflicting emotions warring inside me. Anger at their past treatment, satisfaction at their comeuppance, pity for their situation, and a small, traitorous spark of hope. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the moment they'd finally see me, value me. Okay, I said finally. I'll help. How much do you need? The figure she named made me wince, but I could afford it. Marco and I had done well for ourselves, after all. I made the transfer immediately, a mix of emotions swirling in my chest. It's done, I told her. The money should be in your account soon. Over the next few months, the pattern continued. Text messages would arrive, always asking for money. The amounts were smaller now, but the requests were frequent. And every time, like a fool, I sent the money. After one such transaction, Marco found me staring at my phone, a wry smile on my face. They asked for money again, he asked gently. I nodded. And again, I sent it. God, when did I become such a sucker? Marco sat beside me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. You're not a sucker, amore. You're kind. It's not your fault they can't see what an amazing daughter they have. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon when my world tilted on its axis once again. I was idly scrolling through Facebook, a cup of coffee in hand, when a photo stopped me cold. My parents, looking tanned and relaxed, cocktails in hand, lounging by a pool at what was clearly a very expensive resort. My hand shook as I clicked through more photos. There they were, dining at a Michelin-starred restaurant. Posing in front of a luxury spa. Living it up like they didn't have a care in the world. Like they hadn't been begging me for money for months. With a growing sense of dread, I navigated to my sister's page. What I saw there made my blood run cold. Photo after photo of her with a brand new sports car, at high-end bars, designer shopping bags piled around her. And the captions. Another amazing gift from the best parents in the world. Lucky me, only child. So blessed to have parents who would do anything for me. Spoiled and proud. And there, in the comments, were my parents. Liking every post. Commenting things like, nothing but the best for our little princess, and you deserve it all, sweetheart. I felt sick. The phone slipped from my trembling fingers, clattering to the floor. How could they? How dare they? As if on cue, my phone started ringing. It was them. With a deep breath, I answered. Daisy, dear, my mother's voice dripped with fake sweetness. We were wondering when you might be sending the next transfer. Life's been so hard, you know. We're thinking of renovating the house, it's gotten so old and dreary. Something in me snapped. Hard? I've seen the photos, Mom. The resort. The restaurants. The gifts for my sister. How dare you? There was a pause, then my mother's voice turned cold. Now you listen here. We gave you life. I could have had an abortion, you know. But we chose to have you. You owe us everything. Now, about that money. I didn't let her finish. I hung up, my whole body shaking with rage and hurt. The phone immediately started ringing again. And again, and again. Text messages flooded in, alternating between guilt trips and demands. I turned the phone off. Over the next few weeks, my parents continued to call and message. Demanding money, then pleading, then threatening. I ignored it all. I blocked their numbers, unfriended them on social media, cut off every avenue they had to reach me. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, of guilt. But every time I wavered, I remembered those photos, those comments. The cruel words my mother had spat at me. Years passed, and life continued to evolve. Marco and I had built a successful life in Europe, but something was calling us back to the States. Maybe it was nostalgia, or maybe it was the desire to start a family of our own in familiar surroundings. Whatever the reason, we made the decision to return to my hometown. We quickly settled into our new life. A quaint house in a quiet neighborhood, prestigious jobs that challenged and excited us, and plans for the family we hoped to start soon. It felt like everything was finally falling into place. One afternoon, while having coffee with an old school friend, I learned about the dramatic turn of events in my estranged family's life. Did you hear about your sister's party? My friend asked, her eyes wide with gossip. I shook my head, bracing myself for whatever came next. It was wild, she continued. After everyone left, she fell asleep while smoking in bed. The whole house went up in flames. Your sister made it out, but the house, it's gone, Daisy. Completely destroyed. I sat there, stunned. The house I grew up in, the site of so many conflicting memories, reduced to ashes because of my sister's carelessness. That's not even the worst part, my friend added. Turns out your parents let the insurance lapse. They've lost everything. A part of me felt a twinge of satisfaction, quickly followed by guilt for feeling that way. But mostly, I felt nothing. They had made their choices, just as I had made mine. Life went on. Marco and I focused on our careers, our home, our future. Then, one sunny Saturday morning, a knock on the door changed everything. I opened it to find my parents standing there. They looked older, worn down. The designer clothes and perfectly coiffed hair were gone, replaced by shabby, outdated outfits and graying, unkempt locks. Daisy, my mother said, her voice trembling. We need your help. I stood there, frozen, as they poured out their tale of woe. Living in a cramped, rented apartment. Struggling to make ends meet. No savings, no support from their own parents, unable to find work at their age. And your sister, my father added, his voice bitter. We asked to stay with her, in the apartment we bought her. She kicked us out. Said she didn't have room for old people. A part of me wanted to laugh at the irony. The golden child, turning on them just as they had turned on me. But the laugh died in my throat as I looked at their desperate faces. Please, Daisy, my mother pleaded. We have nowhere else to go. You're our only hope. For a moment, I was tempted. The little girl inside me, the one who had always craved their love and approval, wanted to throw open the door and welcome them in. But then, "You owe us this," my mother said, her tone shifting from pleading to demanding. "After all, I could have aborted you. You owe us your life." And just like that, the spell was broken. I felt a calm settle over me, a certainty I had never known before. "No," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I don't owe you anything. Not for giving birth to me, not for the years of neglect, not for choosing my sister over me time and time again. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them. Now, I'm asking you to leave. If you don't, I'll call the police." My father tried to step forward, but I stood my ground. "I mean it," I said. "Leave. Now. And don't come back." They left, hurling insults and threats as they went. I closed the door, leaning against it as tears finally came. Not tears of sadness or regret, but of relief. Of closure. That night, I called my grandparents. They had always been there for me, even from a distance. They listened as I poured out the whole story, offering words of comfort and support. "You did the right thing, Daisy," my grandmother said. "You can't set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Especially those who wouldn't even notice if you burned." As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The last ties to my toxic past had been severed. The future stretched out before me, bright and full of possibility.